Regulation F has officially begun, and today we are going to be looking at some of the top cores that are emerging early on as the format's cores to beat, cores to break, and we're going to take a look at those today, and we're going to start off with Laddio King Gambit. Now, Laddio King Gambit saw a ton of usage early format. It was picking up. The synergy is incredible. I made a video on the full team as well just a couple weeks ago. And of course, this was normally closed off with Ogerpon, Incineroar, Landorus Incarnate, and Flutterman. I'm not going to fill out the whole team, but Ogerpon, Incineroar, I really wanted to put in here because to me, when I look at this team, this is the definition of balance, right? You've got Intimidate, you've got Fake Out, you've got Redirection, you've got a Fire, Water, Grass core in 2 Pokemon. You then follow suit with another strong synergistic core right here with King Gambit and Latios. You know, you close that out with a Fluttermane. Then you have your Fairy Dragon Steel core or the Fantasy core, right? There are tons of options with this team, and that's why the team was so strong, right? The format was so young, and you just had a team that had answers into everything. Like, they could throw something at you, something that maybe wasn't as well built, and your team would have a chance of functioning as long as you were playing well. Now, I think as the format is developing, this team has fallen off a little bit, right? You would normally see the Landorus I. I'll just put them in for the sake of putting them in. And you would normally see that is not how you spell Fluttermane. Turns out if you misspell Fluttermane, Gabite comes up. Never would have thought that. But what I'm saying is here, this team stayed here. It didn't move past this because it was such a good team early on. People were like, yep, the team is good, and they were happy with it. This team needs to adapt, right? Whether that's you're dropping the Landorus Fluttermane and sticking back to your guns over here and saying, this is my option, this is where I love this team. Whether you're dropping the King Gambit Latios mode and saying, you know, I have my bulk, I have my offense, and I'll patch it up over here. There is tons of room for this core to develop. I do think Latios, King Gambit are very strong in the format. I think the end of this core is probably what needs to change. Maybe the Landorus I, right? Because like you already deal. Landorus I is a really good balance breaker, but you have the balance breakers already. You know, you outbalance the balance. You have a strong pivot piece that can also just switch into Urshifu because you're normally running a Rocky Helmet. You can resist both the Surging Strikes and the close combat from these Urshifus. You hit them back, you get your Tailwind up, right? You have your balance breakers on this team already, right? Fluttermane hits incredibly hard, especially if you're going to go with the Choice Specs variant, right? You have what you need in this core of 5 right here. I would say Landorus is probably the mon that needs to drop. Not that Landorus is a bad mon by any means. And having a ground type beside Fluttermane is incredibly broken. We'll get into that type synergy later on in a future core. But this core needs to adapt. I think the core is still incredibly strong, right? You just have everything. You have Follow Me. You have Fake Out. You have Intimidate. You have two incredibly strong already pre-built cores in Fire, Water, Grass and the Fantasy core of Dragon Fairy Steel, right? And I don't like talking about those types of cores because generally speaking, they're not as common, but there's something to kind of keep in mind in the back when you are building, right? If you're kind of stuck and you go, oh, what am I missing on this team? That's a kind of a helpful point where it's like, oh yeah, I don't have my Fire, Water, Grass core closed off. Maybe I should think about closing that core off. It's not a necessity by any means, but I do want to bring it up because conceptually speaking, this team is incredibly well built. It has coverage into almost everything. And the question is, how are you going to close it? How is this team going to adapt into the format? Core number 2 is actually going to be Shenpao Entei. Now, this core has seen a lot of usage as of late. It's picking up in usage as well. We've seen Chris Hahn go 14-0 in tournaments with a core like this. I believe he closed it off with like an Ogerpon and a Landorus Incarnate. Sorry, Landorus Therian. But either way, that team's on the screen for you guys to see. But more importantly, Shenpao Entei on its own is incredibly strong. It's very similar to Shenpao Dragonite. However, with Entei, you don't necessarily need to send Dragonite. You know, you don't need to send the massive damage that you would normally do with the Dragonite because you have that type synergy, which allows you to be more defensive, right? With Shenpao and Dragonite, you needed to be offensive because you would just get decimated by fairy types, right? Your type synergy wasn't there. But with Shenpao and Entei, you know, you're weak to steel types, you hit the steel types. You're weak to fairy types, you resist the fairy types, right? Your synergy is a little bit more there. It allows you to play that this team a little bit more defensive, and I really do like the Assault Vest variants on this team. Now, that's not to be said that you can't just say, hey, Shenpao Entei is incredible, I'm going to go Choice Band, Terra Normal, E-Speed anyways with the Entei. You can 100% do that as well, right? But the theory is Shenpao and Entei support themselves so much better. And maybe if you go AV Entei here, we have seen variants of this team with a Dragonite on it as well. So now you have Shenpao Dragonite for incredible offense, Shenpao Entei for strong offense with a little bit of better type synergy. Now they can't just safely leave Fluttermane into you. And you still have 3 other Pokemon to finish off this core, right? I'm not saying Dragonite is the correct piece here, but it definitely doesn't hurt to have. But the main concept here is Shenpao plus Entei being able to just put on some immediate pressure, not being able to get faked out. You could actually go Terra Ghost on Shenpao here as well. I have recently been loving Terra Stellar on Shenpao. I think it's a very cool case to consider. But Ghost is just so strong, especially besides something else that can't get faked out, where now I can just basically say if their entire game plan is to fake out, cycle, and and gain leverage that way, I can just say, well, you can no longer just fake me out. You can no longer do that. I've eliminated a mode from your team, and that is incredibly, incredibly strong. Obviously, Entei gets stuff like Stomping Tantrum and Sacred Fire as well, right? So the fire types don't just come in and wall this core because you get access to that ground move, and that's boosted by the Shenpao being on the field beside you. It's just a great core. And my concern with this core is what is your Intimidator going to be? Because when I play this format right now, especially in the highly physical nature of these formats, the last few have just been incredibly, incredibly physical. I want to have Intimidate, right? Normally, in this format, I like cycling Incineroar. When I have an Entei and Incineroar, doubling up on that fire typing doesn't feel great. So the question becomes, what do you close this out with for Intimidate? Obviously, showed Chris's team earlier, he opted for the Landorus Therian, which is completely fair and probably correct on a team like this. But maybe you can explore your options. Maybe I think I saw a few teams actually with Gyarados on them as well on this core. There is room to play. This core needs to develop, but I would recommend having some sort of Intimidator, right? And then you can go, maybe you go, right, you go Landorus, Therian, and Ogerpon Water. I believe this is what Chris had on the team. And this core itself is just incredible, right? And once again, you've got your Fire, Water, Grass core. You've just got, but you have more offensive options. That previous team with the Laddio King Gambit, it was balanced. It was more so, I'm going to take some hits, I'm going to win some positive damage trades, I'm going to position myself in a way where you're going to be struggling to hit me. Whereas this team is more, it's similar, right? But you have that offensive mode. You have the ability to just send offense. And sometimes having the ability to send offense is a lot better than just being able to take hits a little more, especially in a hyper offensive format where you get a lot just from putting out damage immediately. Moving on to core number 3 is actually going to be Incin, Rillaboom, and Raging Bolt. Now, Raging Bolt is really the Pokemon I'm going to focus on this core alone because we've seen Incin, Rillaboom. They cycle in and out. They pivot. We know what they do, right? So the main focus is, how does this enable Raging Bolt? This enables Raging Bolt by allowing it to go for a Calm Mind leftover set, right? And by having Calm Mind and leftovers, this allows the team... This allows you to basically become incredibly, incredibly bulky, right? So I can click Fake Out. I have 2 options. I can lead one of my 2 Fake Outs, Fake Out the Mon that is threatening Raging Bolt and get a Calm Mind up. Maybe they're an all-physical team. Maybe I want to lead Incineroar, just intimidate them and then set up a Calm Mind with Raging Bolt, right? This core alone just allows Raging Bolt to cycle so well. And normally when you see Incin and Rillaboom, what goes really, really well with double Fake Out? You would normally have some sort of Urshifu because it just breaks through, protects. So you're going to protect around my double Fake Out? I don't think you are anymore. It's just not going to happen, right? So this core of 4 on its own is incredibly, incredibly strong. You don't need Urshifu here. You can probably switch this up to a different Pokemon really whatever you want. The core of 3 alone functions, but just adding Urshifu, because Urshifu, Incin, Rillaboom on its own is also an incredible core, right? Now you have your own Incin, Rillaboom, Ursh core with an answer, 2 answers I should say, to the opposing Urshifu cores in Rillaboom and Raging Bolt. And then at the end of the day, you also have that ability to just outbulk opponents with Intimidate, Calm Mind cycles, right? You can just not die, do out enough damage, and you win. You have 2 other slots on this team to patch realistically whatever you want. This core of 3 specifically is incredibly strong. Add an Urshifu because there's really no reason not to, and all of a sudden it becomes a really, really strong 4-mon core. And I think it definitely is going to be emerging as one of those top cores once it figures out how to become consistent enough. Right now, like I said, you have the core of 4. It's really, what do you pair it with now? How do you utilize this to enable the other two, or how do you bring on 2 other pieces to enable this even more, right? And there's tons of options for that. But this core of 3, even drop the Raging Bolt, just have an Urshifu. Drop the Urshifu, just have a Raging Bolt, right? This core right here and on its own is going to be incredibly strong, and I think it's only going to get stronger as the format develops. Moving on to core number 4, which is everybody's favorite Torn Urshifu core. Everybody loves this, guys. Guys, it's not going anywhere, okay? Yes, Raging Bolt exists. Yes, Raging Bolt is a problem for it, but not every team is going to have a Raging Bolt. There are answers to Urshifu Torn, of course, but now you have a new tool, or a tool that was picking up in usage as well, and that is the Landorus I. Landorus I puts on incredible amounts of pressure onto those electric types, and it's almost a perfect answer, just a really solid answer into the Raging Bolt as well. So if you're going to look for a Tornadus Urshifu core, I think Landorus would probably be a very strong option to help deal with those Raging Bolts for obvious reasons, right? Ground type beats the electric type, can't get thunderclapped, etc., etc. You also have the option of Archaludon. I'm not a huge fan of the Archaludon because Archaludon, in my opinion, really relies on getting its electro shot up and utilized, meaning you probably at some point in the game, in order to use Archaludon effectively, probably are going to want to set manual Rain Dance at some point. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Not at all. Is it sometimes more complicated than you would like? Absolutely. So if you're looking, in my opinion, for the immediate answer to the Raging Bolts that are here to mess with Tornadus Urshifu, I would think, in my opinion, that would be the Landorus on this core. But Archaludon is something to consider as well, because you do still get access to it, right? You tend to run Assault Vest, you resist the electric type attack, you hit it back with big dragon moves, right? But of course, Landorus, in my opinion, maybe you just run both, okay? Maybe you just run both. That doesn't even look bad, right? That doesn't look bad. You throw an Incineroar here. This team is probably going to win. This team can probably win a bunch of events, right? Like, this team alone, throw a Fluttermane. Hey, look, I built a good team, guys. You know? This team right here is really strong. You've got Fluttermane, Fake Out potential. You've got 2 things that just beat the Raging Bolt. And then, of course, you've got a really strong core in Urshifu Tornadus. This team could win things, guys, okay? But like I said, the bulk of the core is still Torn Ursh, because just because we're in a new format doesn't mean what was good is no longer good at all. Torn Ursh is still incredibly strong. It just needs to find a way to adapt to those Raging Bolts, to the extra addition of Incineroar with the ability to cycle. Just obviously, Incineroar is probably just dying to Surging Strikes more often than not. However, it is that extra cycle piece that teams can have now that they didn't have in the past. So I would imagine Landorus and Archaludon, one or the other, maybe both, probably slot onto this core to make this core strong once again. I don't think it's going anywhere, guys. If you thought Regulation F was the end of Urshifu Tornadus, I'm sorry, you are mistaken. Now, this is not as much of a core as much as it is a concept. Landorus I is an incredibly strong option. It is an incredibly strong balance breaker, right? You're capable of beating Incineroar, Urshifu, Rillaboom as well, right? Like, you just have so many things that are normally on balanced teams that you just absolutely decimate and that they don't want to go up in front of. So having Landorus is a really good balance breaker. And there's basically, in my opinion, 2 ways to play Lando I right now. You can go on the more offensive teams with the Tailwinds, with the Urshifus, you know, with the Earth Power, the Sandseer Storm, right? And you have these options, right? I cannot type. Typing is not my strong suit, right? It's a good thing I play Pokemon and I'm not a competitive typer. But besides the point, right? You have the options. You can spam damage. But the other way I like playing this is on those more balancy teams. Get rid of the Tailwind mode. Cycle this around with balance. Incineroar, Ogerpon. Because when you're playing balance, going up against the balance mirror is incredibly difficult. So having the Landorus as a balance breaker, maybe you can go substitute as well to take away from the Amoonguss pressure. Right? If I go substitute Landorus, Safety Goggles, Incineroar, and an Ogerpon, that's 3 ways for me to just get around Amoonguss, which is way more than enough, as Amoonguss right now isn't as common as it really should be. Still common, still a really good Pokemon, of course, don't sleep on it, but it's not necessarily as common. But if it does become come back, start picking itself back up in usage. Obviously, this should be Sheer Force Life Orb, right? It is... That's not what I said. There we go. Okay. Right, but if Amoonguss starts picking back up, you can go for the substitute. You can play that. I am just going to sit here, break balance, and that's what balance teams need, right? That's why it worked on the Laddio King Gambit core, right? And one other thing I want to point out is Fluttermane on this, because ground type plus fairy type cover each other incredibly well offensively. If you are going to resist fairy, you are also going to be getting hit by super effectively by a ground type move. If you are a fire type, you are weak to ground. If you are steel, you are weak to ground, etc., etc. Poison, you are weak to ground, right? If you are resisting fairy, you are getting hit super effectively by Landorus or by the ground type, of course, barring any sort of dual typing and anything like that. But this core alone with Landorus and Fluttermane is incredibly, incredibly strong, right? Whether or not you pair this in Lando, Fluttermane, and I'm going to spam Hyper Offense, I'm going to go Tailwind, I'm going to go my Urshifu, I'm going to set Rain Dance for myself, right? You can definitely do that. Or you can do it in a more balanced approach like that Laddio King Gambit team, where you have the Lando, the Incin, and the Ogerpon. You just slowly cycle around. You have big damage when you want to do big damage. You break the balance mirrors, right? There's a lot of options to be said for Lando. Landorus has a lot of options, whereas it's not really, like I said, it's not really a core. It was more so... Yeah, Landorus is incredibly strong at breaking other cores. I wanted to mention it because you see Landorus, like I said, on that Laddio King Gambit core, it was the 5th mon there. It wasn't really part of the core, but it was on the core. You know, it was kind of there. It wasn't necessarily part of it, but it was there. And that's just because it's such a good Pokemon to break other cores, especially wall out other Landorus as well, interestingly enough. But it's going to be a thing in the metagame, and I really wanted to bring up Landorus on its own, and you can showcase that it can be on those hyper offense teams, or it can be on those more passive balancy teams as well. And then obviously the synergy with Fluttermane is just incredible, as it always has been, right? And I'm going to get yelled at for this one because someone's going to be like, Ryan, why are you talking about Psy Spam? I am talking about Psy Spam because it exists. I do not think Iron Crown is amazing. Now, obviously this is functioning off of the expanding force and the Tachyon Cutter. Tachyon Cutter hitting twice, of course, to get around sashes of that Shenpao is probably what the main usage of that is. Also hits that Fluttermane super effectively as well. You cannot get faked out. You've got some decent stats right here, right? And an expanding force in Psychic Terrain, we've all seen it for years with the Hatterene back in Sword and Shield, with the Armarouge in the early days of Scarlet and Violet. And now, once again, people are testing this out with Iron Crown beside Indeedee Female. There are ways to close this out. Obviously, this will be Psychic Surge, right? And the concept here is to get that Psychic Terrain up, spam Expanding Force at all costs. And a lot of these are actually opting to run Focus Blast because everybody at the start of the format was, oh, Incineroar is back, Psy Spam is gone. I have to mention that Psy Spam is not gone because now it's a 2-mon core. Right, whether it's Indeedee Armarouge or Indeedee Iron Crown, okay, so what? You lose to Incin. You have 4 other slots to deal with the Incineroar, the other dark types. Obviously, the Rillaboom cycling around as well is a little annoying. Like, Rillaboom Incin is really, really difficult for Psy Spam. But you know what beats Rillaboom Incin? A core we just talked about in Landorus I. Now, I'm not saying Lando I is going to be the answer, the end-all, be-all, but it is something that I had mentioned before that does kind of maybe slot in on something on a team like this, where it's, oh, you want to all of a sudden outbalance my Indeedee Iron Crown. Well, I'm not going to let you do that because I just have my balance breaker of a Pokemon, right? I wanted to bring up Psy Spam because I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think it's as good as it was, but it is a 2-mon core, and Expanding Force, just the pressure from spread Expanding Force in terrain is disgusting because it gets the boost from the terrain as well, right? You're getting boosted damage, you're getting spread damage, you know, it can stack up to so much damage that can overwhelm teams in an instant. It is a very strong core. Once again, if you have the proper balance tools, you can get around it, but you have 4 other mons on this team to get around those proper balance cores. I think Indeedee Iron Crown, Indeedee Armarouge, that Psy Spam core on its own is incredibly strong, and it probably needs to be tested a little bit. It's seen a little bit of success as of late, but nothing nearly as crazy as it probably should be. I think it should be being seen a little bit more, in my opinion. And the last core we're going to talk about today, because I cannot talk about every core. You know, I can't. I just can't cover everything, unfortunately. At least not in one video, that is. So we're gonna go with the photosynthesis spam kind of teams, where your main objective is to abuse the fact that you have sun, right? You have Walking Wake, you have Torkoal. It doesn't need to be Torkoal. You can go manual sun with a piece like Tornadus if you were really looking for something like that, right? But you also have Fluttermane on these cores normally, right? And you just abuse the fact that you are in sun. And Walking Wake is finally free from its jail. We're going to focus on the Walking Wake here. Right, maybe you add a Chlorophyll onto this as well. But right, like I said, we're going to focus on Walking Wake. Water Dragon, incredible typing. Right, absolutely incredible typing. Hydro Steam? Yep, that's Hydro Pump. Does it not get Hydro? It is Hydro Steam, right? That is the move. There we go. All right. Basically, Hydro Steam is a water move, but it actually gets boosted in the sun to 1.5 power. And that is incredibly, incredibly strong. Because normally you wouldn't want to be setting sun for Walking Wake. But now you can set sun for Walking Wake, get a proto boost, whether you want to do it on speed or into special attack is up to you. I do prefer speed. I think you want to be able to kind of be faster than something, you know? You want to all of a sudden be faster and be able to hit for massive damage. You have 125 special attack stat. You are going to be hitting very, very hard. And obviously, this is your normal set. It should be level 50, of course. But this is something you're looking at. Maybe you drop like 4 and you go 4-4-4 or 4-12-4, whatever you want, right? You're looking at something along these lines. It should be timid, in my opinion, for the speed boosting capabilities. And then you probably go Terra Fire because you also get access to Flamethrower. It's like Palkia, but 100% accurate move Palkia. Non-restricted Palkia, right? Palkia always was known for having that coverage. And now having it in a non-restricted Pokemon in Walking Wake is incredibly, incredibly strong. Yes, Water Dragon loses to Fluttermane, but you go Terra Fire more often than not, right? That's what you see with this. And being able to abuse the photosynthesis, is just incredibly, incredibly strong. I like it personally beside Torn, but you don't necessarily need to have Tailwind on this team. Like I said, I put Torkoal here because we talked a lot about Tornadus, but you can definitely use Tornadus if you want. I like Torkoal. I think it gives you a Trick Room option as well. Maybe you can add a Trick Room element to this team, and all of a sudden, Sun Spam is going insane, right? You have the Walking Wake, which, by the way, in Sun now deals with Incineroar. It gets rid of it. Bye, right? And then it just feels like an incredibly strong core. This is going to be seen, and the problem right now is it hasn't really been explored. We've seen a few top players placing well with it in events, but it hasn't really progressed to a spot where it's like, okay, yeah, this is really, really good. But we saw it back in other formats, you know, Regulation B with the Vancouver winning team abusing the Sun and Great Tusk and the Fluttermane, right? We've seen it work before, and now with Walking Wake being legal again, or for the first time, I should say, it is going to be strong once again. Sun Spam, Proto Spam, whatever you want to call it, is going to be strong. It's also going to counteract some of those Rain Urshifu teams where you can maybe get the Torkoal in later, win the speed control battle there, get the Sun up, hinder off the Urshifu's damage output, which is really, really strong as well. Regardless, this team is incredibly strong. It definitely has room to play. But with that, we're going to wrap this one up here, guys. Once again, I just wanted to cover some of these cores. Obviously not releasing any sort of full teams, but meant to like spark interest. Maybe, oh yeah, I kind of have to keep an eye on this team. Or, oh hey, maybe this is cool for my team as well. Right? Just wanted to kind of feature that kind of stuff. If you guys do enjoy these types of videos, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Really does help out the channel. And of course, I do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.